So I can remember it like it was yesterday. I was driving down the Gold Coast Highway at Tugun. I pulled up to this set of traffic lights and pulled up, tears streaming down my face. And I pulled up and I had this thought in my mind at that moment. I could just drive straight into this intersection when the light was red and get taken out by a truck, and my life would be over, but it wouldn't look like a suicide. That was where I was at. I was more successful than I'd ever been. I was traveling around the country presenting. My business was more successful than it had ever been. And yet I was still depressed. In that moment, I became obsessed with mindset. In that moment, I had the belief that I didn't have any potential in the world. On that day, it became my mission, my purpose, and my passion to allow people to unlock their latent potential. That is why I do what I do every single day. Starting out in mindset, the natural progression from that was moving into flow. All of my clients were saying, I'm just in flow. And I'm like, I have no idea what that is. So I started on this journey, on this path to finding out what flow actually was. And it became this obsession for me. I dived into it head first. Not out of a need to change the world, out of a need to basically just save myself at that point. And what that allowed me to do was create, ultimately, an impact on the world through my story, through my coaching, through everything that I do. So imagine if you could have a 500% increase in productivity. Imagine if you could have a 430% increase in creative problem solving. Imagine if you could have 490% faster skill acquisition. And imagine if you could do that in a scientifically proven way based on the current evidence. Would that be something you'd want to hear about, or? Yeah, you sure? So first of all, we really need to define what flow is. And the best way to be able to define what flow is by defining what it isn't. You see, when we're looking at flow, we're looking at 3 different boundaries. We're in a state of selflessness. Does anyone have that kind of little voice in their head that kind of narrates everything? And if you don't have that, it's probably the little voice that just said, "What little voice?" You see, this is our ego. This is a mechanism which has allowed us to separate ourselves from all of the animals, the animal kingdom. It allows us to solve problems creatively. And when we're in flow, we're not actually in that. We've actually stepped outside of that. We've transcended that state. We've evolved our level of consciousness to the next level. Effortlessness. When the effort becomes effortless, we're in flow. Timelessness. We have a distorted experience of time. It can speed up, it can slow down. We've all had an experience throughout our entire life where it's done one of those things. It could speed up when we're with an intimate partner and time just flies. It could slow down when we're in a car accident. This perception of time becomes distorted for us. So we step into the experience of timelessness, which allows us to create this experience of richness, this self-perpetuating experience, like eating the most divine, orgasmic chocolate cake that you've ever eaten. each bite motivates you to take the next. This is the experience that we experience when we're in flow. We define what it's not. We're not in ourself. We're not in time. We're not in effort. Because that creates the all-encompassing context for us to really truly experience a heightened state of consciousness. So then the next question is, well, how do we get it? There are 4 foundations that we need to be able to create a flow state. We need to be able to have complete and unconditional focus on what we're doing. We need to have a feedback mechanism so that we know that if we're moving towards the thing that we want to create, if we don't have a feedback mechanism, then we don't know if we're actually progressing. It just becomes frustrating for us. We need balance. Balance of the polarities. The most common one that we look at in terms of creating productivity is challenge versus skill. How many people have tried to build a website but they're not a website designer? And how frustrating is that? Yeah. If that's not your skill set, then it becomes frustrating for you because the challenge is too high but your skill is too low. There's a gap. It just creates frustration for you. Now, if that was John who builds website or has a team that does that, chances are that would be a low-level skill. His skill level is high. The challenge isn't very high unless he's trying to do something new. So if we apply these variables of creating the balance between these two things, of challenge versus skill, then we can hit that sweet spot to be able to get in the zone, to be able to get in flow, to be able to tap into that heightened state of consciousness that we just talked about before. This is the power of flow. Also, what we need is a heightened state of consciousness. As Mike touched on earlier, our level of thinking creates the level of results that we actually have in our life. That means that wherever we're at, we have certain winning formulas which are keeping us there, and losing formulas which stop us from moving to the next level. Because if you're an entrepreneur 4.0 moving to a 5.0 in that instance, your thinking creates the result that you have. So evolving your thinking or evolving your level of consciousness determines your ability to be able to get into flow on a regular basis. Does that make sense? And we're going to show you how to do that. So what we're going to cover today is how your individual genetics impact your ability to be able to get into flow. The critical role of your level of consciousness to be able to get into flow, and how to be able to get into flow faster and more regularly. Is that something you guys want to hear about? Or? Yeah? Awesome. So first of all, we need to actually define what flow is, because it's different things for different people. Now, in Stealing Fire, what they commonly talk about is flow being this green line. It's this border of alpha and theta. And one of the great examples that we talk about of some of the geniuses of the last few centuries is Thomas Edison and Albert Einstein used to hack flow. Because flow, in the general term for most people, is this state between drowsiness and asleep and alpha here, which is relaxed but alert. So how do we hack that then? So Albert Einstein and Thomas Edison both did the same thing. What they would do is they would sit in a chair, they'd about to have a nap. What they'd do is they'd go put their hands like this with their keys, and just as they drifted off into that drowsiness of sleep, that would wake them up, and they would be in that borderline frequency. They hacked flow to be able to create some of the greatest changes that this world has ever seen. Now, flow is different for everyone. Not everyone gets flow there, which is what we're going to talk about in a second. There are certain people that can actually tolerate beta ranges much higher than other people. So that can be a flow state to them. When we're talking about the creativity aspect of flow, we're looking at this borderline here. Because what actually occurs in that experience when they're doing the testing on people's brains at this point is, you actually, when you're in flow, you actually get peaks of gamma ranges as well. This is what Mike was talking about earlier. It's like we're pulling information from somewhere we have no idea where it is. We're having these spikes of these epiphanies. Oh my God, where did that come from? Have you ever had the most amazing idea of your life in the shower? Why is that? Well, we're no longer in a beta state. We've allowed ourselves to be able to get to a point where we can actually tap into that flow. Flow is all around us. We're just not using it consciously. We're not consciously creating a mechanism where we can use it on a day-by-day basis. When we understand what flow is and how to create it, we can consciously do that. So, each individual gets flow differently, and this is based on your genetics. And we're going to go into a bit of a framework around that now. So, as a foundational level, we'll categorize people into 6 different flow types. We have the activator. They're fueled by adrenaline. If they don't have adrenaline, they don't get in flow. These are people that they talk about in Stealing Fire that do wingsuiting. The only way that they get in flow is high risk, high reward activities. Now, if we move around to a connector, their drive to get into flow is oxytocin. They can get into flow by connecting with people. They have a visual brain. So we can start to determine people's flow types just based on like their height as a general representation. So if someone's shorter and they can connect with people and they have a visual brain, then that's how they're going to get into flow. They're going to be the people who can actually be project managers and multitask. Multitasking is bullshit for everyone except them. There's always one exclusion. If we know who that is, imagine if we could start hiring people based on what their flow type is. Imagine if you could actually roll this out throughout entire companies, which we've adapted the technology to be able to do that now. We can test people's genetics and understand how their brain works differently to someone else and why there's going to be conflict. The power of this is immense. The guardian, prolactin, is their predominant hormone. Their nurturingness. They're going to be selfless. They're going to put everyone else first. You think about the nurturing mother. Well, you have to produce prolactin as a mother. So that increases your ability to be able to go into that. We move around to a diplomat. Serotonin is the predominant neurotransmitter for them. So that would be someone like Harvey. Very analytical, very tall, very thick joints. So one of the tests that you do is the ratio between here and here, which is going to determine the makeup of how your body actually creates. Because what happens is, as you develop, your brain develops at the same rate your body develops. So if you've got longer fingers, show us your hands, longer fingers comparative to your hand, more likely to have more human growth hormone, which is going to change your entire body. If it's shorter here like this, you're more likely to have more testosterone. He would be the opposite end of the spectrum to me. I'm an activator over here. He would be more of a diplomat. But if I instantly know that and I'm having an interaction with him, imagine how much we can get into flow even more just into interacting with people, let alone me getting into flow myself. The power of this becomes immense. A sensor is someone who is the person who can actually get into flow in a beta range. They can tolerate beta ranges more than anyone else. These are the people that just don't eat. They go all day, and then at the end of the day, they're like, oh, I didn't eat. Whoops. Because they're so focused because they can tolerate that massive stress more than anyone else. We've got the crusader over here, someone who's on a crusade. They have this big picture thinking. Dopamine is the predominant thing. So long as they're working towards the big picture, they're going to drive forward and they're not going to stop either. As soon as we understand what the driver is of these individuals and their flow type, we can start to create roles for other people in our businesses around that. And if we know what ours is, then we know what we should outsource and what we should do ourselves. Make sense? So then the question is, can you categorize everyone in 6 types? Well, no. This gives us a foundational framework to start to look at. Because what actually happens is, by going through a specific process of understanding how that comes to fruition, that's not going to explain it very well, we can actually categorize people into 6 types, and from there it goes into 360 different types. Yeah, exactly. And then, based on those 360 different types, there are different representations of that. So someone as a 300 here is going to be completely different to a 300 here. So that means that we get into the truest form of personalization of every aspect of every single thing that you do. Turn that into a 5.0 business, and what that means is when you start wearing wearable technology, your phone or your watch is going to go, I'm noticing your heart rate is going down. Based on your genetics, you probably should eat a meal that is combined with some protein, some carbs, otherwise chances are you're not going to sleep very well tonight, and that's going to drop your performance 20% tomorrow. Do you want to order that now? Or do you want to have that impact you for the next 24 hours? A or B, which one do you choose? That's the power of this technology. It's using big data based on every scientific study which is actually coming out, because there's more than 80,000 scientific studies getting published every single year. Do you have time to go through all of that information? That's where big data comes in. So a perfect example here is my client, Amy. How many people eat broccoli? Is broccoli good for you? Yeah. Well, it depends, right? Amy here is a 290. She's a 290, which is very close to the middle, and she has hypothyroidism. If she has broccoli, her body almost shuts down. Cruciferous vegetables create impacts to her thyroid, which basically means she has chronic burnout if she eats cruciferous vegetables. And yet, no, broccoli is a good thing, right? She trains every day. For a long time, she was eating broccoli every single day. The impact of individualization on flow or every aspect of someone's life becomes critical. When we understand that every single person is an individual, and we treat them as that, especially ourselves, yes, we start with ourselves. Then we start to move out to every other area. So a true representation of someone's genetics is going to look like this.
Pretty straightforward.
Yeah. That's why we can start to categorize people so they understand it on a foundational level. And once you get down into all of the data behind every aspect of it, it becomes extremely powerful. When you know what your flow type is, you can start to utilize that to be able to maximize your results in every area. Because that's, again, still one level. It starts to look more like this. This is all the data which is required to determine, based on all of the studies which are coming out, based on your genetics. You can start to see the power in this, right? So this starts to play out based on how your brain works as well. So as we start to look at this, we can see how your brain works differently to other people. The framework here actually flips upside down, so that if you're up the top, then you're more likely to be visually focused. Down here, your brain is going to be more focused. You're going to have a more dominant prefrontal cortex, which means that you can actually get into those beta ranges much more. You can tolerate that. You can tolerate that stress. That also means that certain people, like me, I like hostility. That means that if I don't actually express my anger, that has a negative effect on my body. It's like, no, you can't be angry. Well, no, that actually creates physiological implications to me. So it means that I have to find outlets like that. I need to have high-risk, high-reward activities like doing ninja training. Otherwise, my body starts to shut down. I get out of flow. And if I know that based on me, because I'm right on this border here, I'm a 95, then I can start to create an entire life where this actually creates my life being conducive with flow, rather than unknowingly be something which goes outside of that. Make sense? All right, we're going to skip ahead. So basically we can determine based on what your optimal schedule is throughout the day, is through chronobiology as well, based on your genetics. We can determine this is going to be like, this is me, I should be up at 6 a.m. This person here, well, back a bit. This person here keeps sleeping till 8 a.m. If they get up before that, their entire day becomes stressed for them. Make sense? Just a quick example. In terms of that, the next question then becomes, is it just nature or nurture? It's both. What we're looking at here is a framework to determine what is your psychological and personal development expression based on your life, based on your genetics. So if we've got someone here, someone who's depressed, they need different winning formulas to be able to move to the next level comparative to someone who's a driver up here. If we think about most people in the room, we're going to be some defaulters, mainly drivers and on demand. Your ability to be able to get into flow is determined by these. A drifter, just going along for the ride, just a passenger in life. A dreamer, someone who doesn't actually take action, but they've got this massive vision. You know people like this, right? Maybe you are people like this. Defaulter, life is just happening by default. You're not getting the results that you want, you're frustrated. Over here, you're getting the results that you want as a driver, but it's not what you thought. That's where I was. I was more successful than I ever had been previously, and it's not what I thought. Then what I realized was to be able to get into flow and have flow on demand, which meant that I was actually in more demand and I could actually make better choices in my life. The gap was flow. Then we move into the designer, living a life by design, and then actually being the director of flow for other people as well. So, most people won't be in this here. Most people are going to be in this room here. Now, this maps out to an entire map of your thought process based on doing a test of what you actually think about. We can determine what your score is based on this. This is the entire map of how your brain works based on the different levels of thinking. Because as soon as you have a map and you know where you are, you know where you want to get to. It's easy, right? You've got a feedback loop so that you can actually then get into flow. What that then means is we can actually test what your flow ability actually is. We can actually see, because again, you're not just one type. This can be a representation of what your ability to be able to get into flow is like. If you've got thought processes down here, then that's going to hold you back. Because if we actually look at what the scores are here, 0-2, if you've got scores over here, which you've got something that's happened in your life which is holding you back, a -2 is going to dramatically impact your overall score, right? If we could just get a small tweak there to get you to a 1 or a 2, that dramatically impacts your life based on one thing that's been holding you back. We can determine that by going through the flow test. We can also determine that different people are going to have different winning formulas. How many people have posted on social media about you might not have, but someone you might know has, posted on social media about depression and calling certain phone numbers? Do you know someone who's done that? Yeah, awesome. That actually creates more of a problem. Because that's a winning formula for someone here or here, and that actually perpetuates the shame, because if it was that easy, I would have already done it. Of someone in depression, because they think that they don't have support or understanding. They have support, but they just don't feel like they're understood. So no one really wants to die in depression. They just want the pain to stop. They're ashamed of how they actually feel. They don't actually want to talk to anyone, which is part of the problem. That plays out on every single level of thinking, which we can actually map out, see exactly where you sit, so we can allow that to evolve. We can determine what your scores look like, and then our ability to be able to get into flow is understanding the foundation that flow is not an on-off switch. It doesn't just go on and off. There are 4 phases to it. What's required here is struggle. We can talk about that in terms of planning. If we look at this in a business context, if we have no planning in our business, what's going to happen? Well, we just go out and do stuff, but we don't actually know if we're progressing. There's no feedback loop. So this struggle becomes essential. It's this planning phase. It's a doing component, which is then followed by a release component. Because most times we plan stuff out and then we just go straight into it, right? That's not actually how our brain works effectively. It works more effectively if we plan and then we go and do something else which is going to be relaxing for us. Albert Einstein used to go out in his rowboat on I think it was the Vienna River or the Vienna Lake or something, and he'd just sit there for a couple of hours. And then he'd come back and he'd do his best work because he'd then be in flow. Because what would be happening is he wouldn't be thinking about the problems that he wanted to solve on a conscious level. His unconscious was doing it in the background while he was doing something else. If your conscious brain is 5% of your brain capacity, would it make sense to use the 95% and actually relax in between doing those things? That's how we actually start to have those epiphany experiences. That's actually how we start to solve problems much more creatively. That becomes the power that we have. Then the recovery phase comes in as well. Flow, yep, we all know about that. Recovery phase. People don't think about recovery or flow. If it's a heightened state of consciousness, it's going to have an impact on our body. This is again where the genetics comes in. Because if you're eating broccoli and you have hypothyroidism, your ability to recover is not going to be there. For me, if I have bananas or watermelon, it impacts my ability to be able to get into flow. And again, are they healthy foods? Just not for me, right? So what are unhealthy foods for you then that are blocking your ability to be able to recover from flow? So when we think about our ability to, solve problems creatively, that comes from the ability to actually do back-to-back cycles of this. And when we think about actually accelerating the speed of learning, it's the same thing. Because if you can get into one flow state, then you don't actually really learn really fast, do you? But if you could go through multiple ones of these throughout the same day, imagine the compounding effect of that learning. That's where the accelerated learning comes in from it. When we bring these three things together, we can start to create this environment conducive with flow, because unbeknown to us, most of the time we're blocking it. We're blocking every aspect of how we actually start to get into flow. When we know our individual needs and we can create an environment conducive to that, then we can start to actually create that as being our entire life. Make sense? Yeah. Personally, I believe if you're not in flow, you will never live up to your potential. So it is my mission, my purpose, and my passion to allow people to use flow to unlock their potential. Thank you.